Welcome to another Kintone tutorial, and we're going to talk today about how to hook up your Kintone backend database to a React project using Express as a backend. We're going to go into the details of all that, how it works. We're going to get you signed up for a Kintone developer's license, your own subdomain, free forever, and also explain why you need a backend and how web databases work. And we're going to use all of that to extremely quickly set up a cool REST API project that we hope you will use for an upcoming contest that I will talk about at the end of this video. Stick around. First, to talk about what we are making today. This is what I thought of for an example project. Yours might be a little bit different, but I wanted to know around the world who's using Kintone. Why? I work for Kintone. But also, it's just interesting to me, and that's one of my favorite parts of this job, is just seeing who's using the product and talking to people from all over the world. So first, I want to talk about what I decided to make for my project. I just hacked together a quick little REST API project using Kintone, and why I chose to do it, and a little bit about how we're using the React, for example, in order to display our information, why we're using Express as our backend in order to save to our web database. And looking at this, I decided to name my project I Use Kintone. And that's because for me, one of the not boring parts of this job is seeing people all over the world and talking to them, usually during our live streams. So I wanted to make an app that will ask people their location and then tell them like, hey, this many people in your country use Kintone, maybe display a map or something like that. So what you can do right now on our front end is you can pick a country. I'm just going to do the US here and Wisconsin, yeah, Milwaukee. There you go. And what happens is we have this location data, and when I click submit, we get a little spinner, and it saves it into our Kintone database, which I refresh right now, and you can see United States, Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And so that's what we'll be going through how to make today on the back end. This will not cover the front end portion of this project, aka what you're seeing on the screen right now. We have lots of tutorials about how to do React front ends, other frameworks like Svelte front ends using Kintone, where we practice JavaScript together. So definitely check them out on our YouTube channel. Today we'll just be talking about how to send information from your app to an Express backend, which then sends that information to your Kintone database. Let's get started. What is Kintone? Kintone is a no-code, low-code platform to help developers and also teams boost productivity, and you can make a web database with drag and drop controls in less than 5 minutes. It's super easy to use. You can go to our website, kintone.dev, and if you want to try it out for free forever, as long as you're not adding a lot of users, then you can scroll down to get a developer's license right here at the bottom. So in order to sign up for your Kintone developer license, you have this registration form, and you can, of course, read the details, but basically what it says is this is free, and I really mean free as in we do not sell your data, for example. As long as you have less than 5 users, you don't spam lots of API calls. It's really just a testing domain for you to test things out in a safe environment and make cool projects and hack with. If you scroll down right here, you need to give us a little bit of information. Like I said, we don't do anything with it. Sean, Luce, and Sean at kintone.com. Please don't spam me. And if you give us a little bit of information, we do pay a lot of attention to that. It's a small operation over here. Definitely come to our Kintone workshops, and you're watching a YouTube video right now, aren't you? There's a YouTube video. And I want to study, program, and have an easy-to-use backend/database. The very last part right here is what you want your subdomain to be. You can see here I typed in Sean, and this subdomain is not available. I already took it. Sorry, everybody. It is going to be the portion of your URL that comes before DOM. So my subdomain, I put in there Sean, and I got the subdomain sean.kintone.com. Get them while they're hot, everybody. After you click and agree with our terms of service and privacy policy, and you click sign up, you will get an email. And please activate via your email. We don't want people to spam domains, so you do need a valid email address. And when you are first accessing your Kintone subdomain, your username will be that email. So my username here would be sean@kintone.com, and then it'll ask you to create a password. When you have finally logged into your subdomain, it will look something similar to this, although maybe you'll have a lot less hacky projects and apps over here on the side. But it will look very similar to this, and then you can get started creating your very first Kintone backend. Next, I'd like to show you what we'll be starting our project off with. Here at Kintone, we provide repositories in our GitHub that help you get hacking really fast, and we also use these as a basis for our workshops. If you scroll down here, we have quite a few cool projects, but we're going to be doing a React and REST API workshop today. And if you click here, you can see that we provide all sorts of things. We provide you with a starting off point for the workshop, but if you really want to cheat, then you can actually access the completed code as well. We have very detailed readmes with cool images and step-by-step instructions. You can see in this docs folder right here, we have the solution to the code as well, and also written down step-by-step instructions, so you don't even have to listen to me if you don't want to. Go ahead and clone this repository in your terminal, run a GitHub repo clone, and you can get your own starting off point for this project. Do be sure to check out our other projects as well and our live workshops. You can always give us a follow or a star on GitHub as well if you want to be notified when those come. Now that we've cloned into our repository, we are going to cd that out as a React and REST API workshop, and we're going to do this in 2 terminals, and I will explain in a little bit why we are doing that. But hint, hint, one is for our front end and one is for our back end. Whenever you clone a new project, of course, you want to install your dependencies. But first, let's take a look at what those dependencies are. And if you open up the package.json right here, we're going to be using a couple of things. We're going to be building this project on React for our front end using Express as our back end. You can see here. We also have a few helper packages because it's React. Why not use the incredibly large amount of public repositories, NPM packages, and the ecosystem that React has, right? So we have country, state, city here, which will be giving us some country, states, and cities lists. Very cool project. We have a loader spinner, and we have a little select box that'll do a lot of searchable magic for us as well. So now that you know what dependencies are doing, quickly run a npm install. And as you see that we're installing these dependencies, you're going to see a lot of notices for deprecated or critical errors, very, very scary with big red text. We did a little bit of looking into this for you, and it turns out that this is A-OK, only this time though. Why that is, because we are using React Scripts, version 5.2. React Scripts is a building tool, and you can see that they have a GitHub issues right now saying, help, npm audit says I have vulnerabilities, and they've pinned this to the top because so many people ask about it. But in short, React Scripts is a build tool, and because it will never be included in your JavaScript bundle, it is therefore not technically vulnerable to these sub-dependencies or cross-dependencies that do have reported vulnerabilities in them. So if you see a lot of critical errors, you can actually check what will be sent in your JavaScript bundle by running npm audit -- production rather than npm audit. And you can see here, if I run it here on the terminal, found 0 vulnerabilities. So the next step in our project would be to build out our backend database and fill it with information. But before we do that, I always like to take a look at a finished product or someone else's product and try and break it down into its pieces and think like a programmer. It's a very valuable skill to be able to take something cool that you found on the web and recreate it in your mind with what kind of data structures would I need in order to make this on my own. This time we have a very simple front end that just has a few select boxes here where you can pick a country. You can see right here. You can pick the state that you live in that country, and then you can pick the city that you're from. Note that this is going to be a tutorial just focusing on the back end and posting your information to a database. We won't really be going over what and how to code this front end right here. If you are interested in that kind of content, then please leave a comment, and we'll think about making a tutorial on how to make this front end in React as well. So you can see that we can pick our country here. So we have the United States. Sure, I used to live in Wisconsin once, Milwaukee specifically. And then the user fills in this information with their country, state, and city. Then down here we have a submit button, and I think that's pretty clear that it will fire off our post API request to save to our database. We also have here for testing purposes a get button. We won't really be using that information, but I wanted to show that you could do get requests as well. Remember, our end goal for this app is to eventually display a map, a world map of all the people who use Kintone around the world and like what city they're operating from. That's what I want to see. And so I decided to have our database have just country, state, and city because I could place a pin on a map based on country, state, and city. You might need to, for example, add latitude or longitude as well to that, and you could definitely easily customize this app to do that. So now I'd like to go over how to create our Kintone web database. If you navigate to your subdomain, here mine is sean.kintone.com, and you can see in the top right under apps, this is where we can click to create a new web database. If you click here and scroll down, today it's a very simple app that's just going to store someone's country, state, and city. So we're going to create it from scratch, but you could also import from CSV. We have template files available. You can copy existing apps as well. So click on Create App from Scratch and first give it a cool name. I use Kintone. And you can see here that we can easily create a type-safe database with drag and drop, just like this. And we're going to do 3 text fields this time, one for country, state, and city. And what I mean by type-safe database is that this database is already coded that if you were to put in an integer, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or a Boolean, true or false, into here, it would automatically be converted into a string and therefore not mess with your data. And the same goes for other fields here as well. If you scroll down just a little bit more, we have a created datetime. This will automatically give us a date timestamp of when this data was posted to our database. Sounds good to me. And the next thing that you have to do is in the settings for these fields, give them easy to understand names, country, and then when you scroll down, we will be referencing these fields in our code via the field code. Make sure that you correctly name these, whatever you're going to be using in your code. In our code base, we're doing lowercase country, lowercase c country, save, just like above, uppercase S for state for the name, and field code, lowercase s state, save, and once again for city as well. Scroll down to the field code and lowercase c city. And if you click Save Form up here in the top left, you have almost already created your type-safe database in, I think, less than a minute. The next thing that we want to do is generate an API token, right? We need an API token to authenticate when we're going to be posting to our database. And if you scroll down here to App Settings and then API Token, click Generate. I will be deleting this later. You can see that we have permissions scoped for our API token as well. Normally that would take a long time and a lot of effort in order to set up. We can do that in seconds here on Kintone. Make sure you copy your API token, and then at the very end, click Save, and in the top right, make sure that you click Activate App. Otherwise, your changes will all be discarded. And there you have it. We have our Kintone web database with type safety, an API authenticated route, and scoped permissions. So just as a side note, now that we have our database ready, you can add data to your database manually by clicking this plus sign in the top right. And you'll notice here that you have to type it in by hand, but it gives basically non-coders, people who aren't so tech savvy, a way to easily contribute to your projects and databases as well if they're logged in users. So I can type in here, United States, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee, and click Save right here, and it'll save this record into my database for me. I go back to my records view, and you can see here that it has been correctly saved into the database by hand. Today's project will actually be handling the posting of data to our database for us, but Kintone is very versatile for both coders and non-coders alike. So now that we have our Kintone web database with a little bit of data, we need a way to connect it to our React front end that we have provided here for you with this code repository. If you open up the repository in your favorite code editor and scroll through, you can see here that we've provided a .env.example file or a .environment variables.example file. And the way that we often connect and share sensitive information such as API tokens and login usernames, passwords, is through these .env files. What I want you to do is to copy and paste your .env.example file and rename that new file to just simply .env. And you can see from the contents of it what information that we need to provide to our app in order to get it up and running. It says here that we need a subdomain, an app ID, and an API token. You can get your subdomain and app ID from your URL of your app that you just created. If you go back to I use Kintone, and in the URL up here, if you copy that, I'm going to temporarily paste it down here. You can see here that we have sean.kintone.com, and that is going to be my subdomain. Your subdomain will be whatever comes before the .kintone.com. And then the app ID of the app that you just created is going to come after the /k. Mine is 65 here because I have created 65 different web databases on Kintone. If this is your first time using Kintone, then it'll probably be 1. And that's where you get that information from. Our last part is our API token, and we just created that, but I forgot to copy and paste it. So if you go back to your app on the records view and click on this arrow next to the cogwheel, go down to customization and integration and API token, you can see this API token that we just generated and copy and paste it here. And with this, you have successfully created authentication credentials that will allow only people who know the API token to post to our database, which is a very secure way to go about it. So I'd like to take a moment to explain the code base that we have provided for you as a start-off point for this project. If you open it up in your favorite code editor, you can see a lot of files, but first I want to point out of the README file that we provide. And in the README file, we provide detailed steps on where to find certain information, debugging information, and all that you need to get ready to code. So please check that out. And also in this docs folder up here at the top, you can see that we actually have the finished code for you in the workshop as solution.md. We also have the workshop steps as well if you want to just skip this video and just read the steps on your own as well. So please make sure to check those out. Going down, this is a React project, and so you can see we have our source folder, src, and this time, because we're only focusing on our backend with our Express server, we're not going to go into details of app.js and how we coded this out. You can see that we have a fully featured front end that I showed you at our project earlier, and this front end exists pretty much only to make GET requests and POST requests to our Express server. But what we do need to talk a little bit about is our requests, because that is the actual functions that will be firing off requests to our Express server. If you open up getRecord.js, you can see that we declare a reusable function here that is just going to access localhost 5000/getData. And you can see in the comment above, it is the get endpoint defined in our Express server. After that is a simple fetch request, and it awaits a JSON response and then sends that JSON response, aka the database data that you just got, back to your front end so you can display it, for example. Our post request.js is pretty much the same thing as our get request, except for it is a post request. We are saving the data to our database. We need to tell our post request what data we want to save. So you can see here in this file, we also have our record body parameters where we are saving our country, which is passed to our post record function via location.country, state is location.state, city is location.city, which is then also given to our fetch request. So our API requests are making requests to our Express server on the backend. Let's go check out our backend, which is contained all here in a backend folder. Oh, you can see a package.json and package.json and a server.js file where we have all of our configuration ready. I see a package.json. I guess we need to install some dependencies here. You can see that we have a couple here, cores.env, Express, and a node monitor, nodemon. So let's go ahead and navigate in the terminal to our backend folder as well and run npm install here as well. That was fast. Then moving back, you can see now that we have our dependencies ready, and you can open up server.js in order to check out our Express server, and we will begin coding it together. So here we have our Express server in server. And just starting at the top of the file, we have our dependencies being imported. We have express, requiring express, cores, requiring cores, port is equal to 5000, and our app is an express app. We are also resolving our .env file using .env, and we set that up earlier, right, with our Kintone subdomain, our app ID, and our API token right here. It is only our backend this time that will be speaking to our Kintone web database. So this is the only place where we need to reference our API token and subdomain and app ID. This is a REST API, so we will be dealing with JSON, of course. So we're going to have our app use Express's built-in JSON parser. And we need to set up for cores, as I said earlier, in order to allow cross-origin resources to be shared. So we are allowing some data to come in from localhost 3000 before our database, our Express server, speaks to our Kintone web database. And speaking of our Kintone web database and its REST API, what are the endpoints, or what is the information that we need to send, and where do we need to send it to? You can see that we've also included here for you as boilerplate our API endpoints. We have a multiple records endpoint and a single record endpoint here. And where do we get this information from, right? You can always check out our documentation here at kintone.dev. If you go over to the API docs tab in our Kintone REST API, this time we're going to be dealing with records, right? We're going to be basically getting records and adding a record at a time. So let's open up some get records and add record right here. And you can see with get records, our endpoint, it specifies it right here that we need to send it to our subdomain, mine is sean.kintone.com, the records.json endpoint. And because this is a GET request, we don't need to send any additional information, right? But for our POST request, where we're going to be saving data to our Kintone web database, we need to tell it what data we need to save. And we also want that data structured in a specific way, right? That's how REST APIs work. We have examples down here for your reference of how your body should be basically structured for your POST request. You can see that it's an object, and we have basically an app ID, we have the record, and then here we have our fields that we entered. Our text field, for example, which we actually named country or state or city, and it has a value of XYZ. And so on and so forth for the different fields. This time we only have 3 fields, so we will only need to have 3 object parameters in our request body today. So now that we've explained how our endpoints work and where you can find more information about that, it's time to get ready to code. So we are going to close this right here, go into focus mode, and leave some comments as we code. That's always good coding practice. So first we need to code out our get route, right? I always like to start with get. It's easier than post. And basically in our get request file, we specified that our endpoint would be localhost 5000 / get data. We have specified the localhost 5000 part up here in our config with port is equal to 5000. And in the fetch request from our get records function, we actually specified in the fetch request itself that it is a GET request, but what we have not done is basically say the get data part of what that endpoint is called. So right here, we're going to, this route executes when a GET request lands on localhost 5000 / get data. We're going to call this route get data. And then going down, the way that you set up a new route in Express on an Express server is we designated this app object right up here as an Express server, and we called it app. And so what we need to do here is type in app dot, and then what kind of request is it? This is a GET request, so app.get. And then what is that endpoint going to be called? In our fetch request that we designated earlier in our request folder, right, it was /get data. So we're going to do get data right there. And then next, we also need to designate which domains or which subdomains or which origins are we allowed to receive data from, right? So we're going to designate our cores is equal to our cores options that we set up there above. So we're going to be accepting data from localhost 3000, aka our React frontend. Next, Express server And when you set up these routes, it is very easy to set up an async basically function or an async request that has a response. So you just simply type in async. We are having a request and a response object that's going to come out of it and arrow function, right? Now, underneath all of this, oh, I can see a little typo there. I made chords options. That's a mistake. Thank you, VS Code, for highlighting that. But you can see that under the hood, this is actually just going to be a normal fetch request, right? We are, from our backend, doing another fetch request to our Kintone web database. So because it's fetch, you need to specify your fetch options right here. And this time our method is going to be get, right? It's a get method. We need to get our records. And if you check kintone.dev and its API token authentication section, you will see that we need headers that specify our X, Sai, Bolzu, watch out for the spelling, API, all caps, token. And that is going to be equal to our API token that we specified up here from our .env file earlier. Now that's it for our fetch options, right? Now we need to just simply create a fetch request. And the way that we do that is with a pretty standard assignment of the response variable that we're going to create right here. It's going to be equal to await fetch. And we are going to fetch from, well, where do we want to fetch from? This is a GET request, right? And so if you think about it, we need to get all the records of all the people around the world, aka multiple records that use Kintone, right? I want to know if you're from Brazil. I want to know if you're from America. I want to know wherever you're from. And so we're going to be getting multiple records with our GET request. So our endpoint is going to be our multiple records endpoint that we designated above. And it is going to take in our fetch options, or fetch option. Let's add an S to that just for fun in order to be semantically correct. And that is going to be our fetch request itself. Now, please do note that if you're using an older version of Node where fetch was not actually introduced yet, this will not work for you as is. You may have to import fetch as a library or a dependency. Please double check the README for more information. But if you're on Node version 18-ish or later, then fetch will be able to work for you as is. And then lastly, because we are working with a RESTful API, our response is going to come back as JSON, right? And we need to parse that. So we're going to create another variable called our JSON response, sure. And that is going to be equal to our response that we just got and then parsed here. And then up above in our original getData sort of function line here, we specified that this route will take in a request and send back a response. Request, response. That's the RESTful API, right? So our response that we send back from this endpoint is going to be equal to our response, which is going to be JSON, is going to be equal to our JSON response that we designated right here. And that is our GET request. And if you save this and go over to your server, make sure that both of your servers are up and running, both your front end and your back end with npm start. And if you click GET, you should see the data that we entered into our app is displayed right here for us. And now that we have our GET request done, let's work on our POST request, which is going to be similar, but a little bit more difficult because this time we'll be sending information right from our Express server backend to our Kintone web database. We need to tell our web database, hey, I want to save this country, this state, and this city information right here. So let's leave a little comment here. So this part will run if a POST request, okay? If a POST request at localhost 5000, and in our request, post request.js in our front end, we actually call the localhost 5000 post data. So that's what we're going to call this one. And in our post request, we specified that we need to send our country, state, and city, right? So our Kintone apps field codes, right, that we specified earlier were country, state, and city. And just so you know, you can double check where those are in your Kintone app at any time. If you go back to your Kintone web database and click on the edit button, the cogwheel up here. For each field that we have, remember that we set up in settings at the very bottom here a field code. Lowercase c, country, is what we designated this field as. And so that is what we need to reference it by every time that we need to make a REST API request. Common point of failure. So if you're having problems, definitely check the README, but also double check your field codes as well, because I know I have mistyped them many times myself. So once again, we're going to be creating a new route, right? Just like up above, we did app.get. Now we're going to be doing that's right, post. We're going to be app.post. And we are going to specify this time that our route is post data. So we're going to do /post data, localhost 5000 /post data. Once again, we need to accept for cores, our cores options, right? We need to accept data from localhost 3000. That's A-OK. And then once again, we are going to be creating an async function that takes in a request and gives out a response, and the function does XYZ. And that is why we have our arrow function right here. So because this is a post request, we need to format what data that we're going to send. We talked a little bit about it earlier on Kintone.dev and the add records documentation. You can double check what a post request is supposed to look like. We have it all right there in the documentation site. But basically our app, which database are we going to be saving this data to, right? That's a good thing to know right off the bat. I had, 65 different databases. For you, this may be your first one, but we can do this right here. And let's set it up so that our request body is an object, So our request body is going to be an object, and then within that we have app is equal to our app ID that we specified from our .env file. We need to tell the request basically what data we're going to send. What does the record that we're going to save look like? And that's going to be an object as well. And here's where our field codes come into play, right? Which fields are we going to be updating? Which ones are we not going to be updating? This time we have 3 different fields, right? Country, state, and city, and we're going to be updating all 3 of them with whatever information that gets passed to this Express Server backend post endpoint. So right here we can do our field code of country, and the country field is going to have a value. You need to type in value right here. I often forget the value. And that value is going to be equal to whatever data comes into our post request. For this, we designate it as request, right? We're requesting to save this data. And because it's in JSON, we're going to be taking the body of that request, and then we're going to be taking it in as the country field. You can double check all of this and why we structured this way in the requests folder on the front end as well, if you get lost. Next, besides country, we're going to be doing almost the exact same thing. State, lowercase s, is an object. The value of the state field is going to be equal to our requests body state. And lastly, of course, city. I want to know what city you're from. Our city is another object. We'll have a value of request.body.city. And here, if you have done this correctly, then we have structured our request body app properly. And now we need to pass that request body into our post request function from our backend Express server to our Kintone web database. So let's do that. It is a fetch request once again. So we are going to create some fetch options, or I'll just call them options, I guess, here. And that's going to be an object itself. This time the method is going to be equal to posts. We are going to be making a post request, right? We're going to be posting, saving some data into the database. Our headers, once again, we are going to do our x saibozu token, and that is going to be the same API token. Remember, we gave our API token permissions to both get data and also save data, but not, for example, edit or delete data. And also we're going to specify, as is REST API convention, what our content type was, right? And our content type is just going to be equal to application/JSON in lowercase. Then, as the last part of our options, we have our method, our posting, we have our authentication and our headers and what we're sending. Next, we actually need to tell it what information we are sending, you always include that in your options, your fetch options, and that is going to be in body. And we're going to stringify, right? We're going to create a JSON string of our request body that we formed up above. So here's our request body. And if we have all of that done, we have our options ready. Once again, we're just going to make a fetch request, a new variable, our response, our const response is equal to await. We're making another fetch request. And this time, remember, users are only saving one record at a time, right? I only live in one city at a time. We don't need to know where everybody is at for making this database save request. So we are going to be saving to the single record endpoint up here with a post request. So our single record endpoint, and then we pass in our options that we specified up above, our method, our headers with our API token, and our very important JSON request body. And just like before, we are going to get a response back in JSON. So we're going to set that equal to awaiting response.json. And just like before, when you make a endpoint in Express with an Express server, here we specify that we'd be taking in a request and giving back out a response. You can double check that, of course, on the Express documentation. But our response is going to be sent back in JSON, and we're sending back that JSON response as is. Save all of this information, and if you go to the bottom, this is more boilerplate, but basically our app is listening for requests on our localhost port, right? And we've logged that to the console actually whenever you start up your Express server. So quickly, since you changed so much, just to be sure, go back and stop your Express server on the back end, start it back up with npm run start in the backend folder. And that's going to start up. You can see here that our Kintone app only has one record in there, but what if someone were to come by and pick out the United States in Washington, and I used to live in a town called Carnation, so sure, and we'll submit that to our database. You can see in the console that it's already said success, but if we go back to our Kintone database, we have successfully saved some information, and our app is a wonderful flying success for both GET requests and pull requests. To review what we've done today, because we actually did quite a lot in a little bit of time, you have successfully created a React front-end project that uses a React front-end with user inputted data. It then sends that data to a Express server backend, right? Your own custom backend where you could do all kinds of cool stuff. But today you're just sending that data to a Kintone web database. That Kintone web database, which you made in less than 5 minutes, is type safe. You cannot save integers into the string field. It'll just become strings, right? It is API token authenticated. There is very strong security on there as well. And it can be edited by other users that you add and choose to your Kintone domain. And you did it all for free with your Kintone developer's license. That's pretty darn cool in my opinion. If you like this content, what we did today, then please head on over to our Kintone developer program on YouTube. I've already clicked this button right here, and I think you should too. Because in the future, we'll be expanding on this app. We'll be adding a map, right? I want to see where everyone around the world is using Kintone, and I want it to be displayed on a map. And also one of our more common questions is how do you host these projects? We'll go over how to host a project on your own custom domain. So www.seanskintone.usermap.com, for example. So please like, subscribe, and you can get notified about all this cool stuff that we're doing over here. And it's all free. The workshops are free to attend. Lastly, we have our Kintone developer forum. If you ever have questions about what we're doing or something that you're trying to do, even job listings and other cool opportunities that we have, go to forum.kintone.dev and you can talk to us directly. And we check the forum, ask questions there if you ever need any help on using Kintone. Yeah, so once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for your time. And yeah, we hope that you enjoy using Kintone and you go and make something cool and definitely try and show it off. Thank you.